I followed my wife on a business trip. Something inside me screamed that something was wrong, that those hurried kisses at the airport, the cell phone always facing down, the forced smiles and that new perfume, a perfume she never used on me, weren't just signs of a new phase at work. For weeks I tried to ignore the discomfort, telling myself it was just insecurity. But insecurity does not send false location. Insecurity doesn't leave lipsticks and glasses hidden at the bottom of the trash can. Insecurity does not send audios whispering, "See you in the room, 7 p.m. That night, I waited for her flight in advance, sitting in the airport lounge, hidden behind a newspaper, like in a cheap spy movie. The flight arrived. She came out smiling, flawless, her heels clicking dryly on the floor. And right behind her, laughing as if they were sharing an ancient secret, was him. The man she said she hated, the boss who demanded so much of her. So intimate, so synchronized. When they got into the taxi together, I followed. When they got off at the hotel, I watched. When he touched her back with an open palm, like a repeated, routine gesture, my stomach turned. I waited. I waited as they went up, as she laughed in the lobby, as the elevator closed. I waited until there was no more silence in me. So, I went up. The bedroom door opened after a few insistent knocks. She appeared wrapped in a white robe, her eyes wide when she saw me. He appeared right behind, his shirt already open. And there, without screaming, without tears, I just looked her in the eyes and said, "The divorce is already signed. I just came to deliver it in person." The color drained from her face. But nothing compared to the expression that came later. It wasn't fear. It was panic. Despair. And not for me. Something in that room felt wrong. An open laptop, scattered papers, bottles of expensive wine. But it was the envelope on the bed that caught my attention, company documents, signed contracts. She tried to hide it, but I had already seen it. He tried to intervene, said something about us overstepping boundaries, but my voice cut him like a razor. "You've already passed them all." I left without slamming the door. Because sometimes silence is the biggest blow you can give. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something beyond. In the days that followed, a fog of confusion and shame settled over her. Emails are gone. Messages were deleted. Her name, once mentioned with pride in meetings, became a whisper. The lover, previously haughty, started walking around looking around. What seemed like just a hotel case hid something bigger, something dirty, something that could drag them both to the bottom. Meanwhile, I, the betrayed, was overcome by a mixture of ruin and rebirth. The pain was physical. I slept little, ate less. The house echoed the emptiness where there had once been promises. Friends disappeared, relatives tried not to choose sides. But in the silence, I found space. And little by little, life, the one she tried to bury, began to sprout again. Then I found out, the man she cheated on me with, her powerful boss, was being investigated for tax fraud. And her. I had signed documents for him. All for love. Everything to please him, to be more than just a lover. He had become an accomplice. And now, she carried the risk of being held responsible. Authorities were already moving. And the worst part, the documents she signed, were in my possession. She looked for me. She called, cried, begged me to listen to her. He said he had made a mistake. That now he saw how much he loved me. That everything was a temporary delusion, that he manipulated her, that he needed me. But I was no longer the same man. Time passed, and on the path to reconstruction, someone emerged. Someone who saw my scars as part of my beauty. Someone who didn't demand explanations, who didn't look at me with pity, but with the desire to walk alongside. What was born there was different. It wasn't blind passion, it was connection. Real. And unshakable. When she appeared at my door, months later, holding a bag of memories, tears in her eyes and her voice breaking. She saw something she didn't expect, my smile. I saw her eyes roam every corner of the house, now filled with another energy, another perfume, another laugh. She realized then and there that she had lost. That there was no return. That the home where she was once loved, now belonged to another time, another story. She still tries. Send messages. Show up in places where you know I'll be. Pretend casual encounters. But what's left for her are memories of what she destroyed with her own hands. Because betrayal doesn't end in the hotel room. It spreads roots, devours bonds, corrupts futures. Today, I look back and I don't feel hate. I feel relief. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply moving forward, stronger, more whole. And let time do what it does best, reveal who we really were when we thought no one was watching. What she still doesn't know, is that the secret she hid in the hotel room, the one she signed without reading, the one she tried to bury with lies and promises, could not only ruin her career, but also open doors to something she never imagined. And maybe, just maybe, she let slip a detail that could turn everything against her, something that was right under my nose the whole time. Something that could change everything, again. Will she escape? Can the new love resist the shadow of the past? Will justice be served, or once again, will those who betray go unpunished? Maybe, the answer lies precisely in what she thought no one would ever discover. Welcome to the channel. Here, none this form of betrayal is romanticized or encouraged. On the contrary, all our stories show the devastating consequences that infidelity can have on the lives of those you love and trust. The narratives you will hear are fictional, but based on real emotions, with the clear objective of exposing the naked truth. Betrayal always takes its toll. Get ready now to dive into another intense story, full of twists, pain and redemption. Take a deep breath, because what comes next is simply shocking. Daniel has always been a man of silent plans and concrete gestures. He grew up with the certainty that nothing great is built in shouting, but in detail. He was reserved, not out of shyness, but out of conviction. He observed more than he spoke, offered presence instead of promises, and, over the years, he learned to transform work into security, and security into a kind of love. He met Laura on a sultry summer afternoon at a marketing conference where she, with her captivating enthusiasm, had been scheduled as a last-minute replacement speaker. He perfectly remembered the moment she took the stage with a slight nervousness visible in her shoulders, but that disappeared as soon as she started speaking. There was something magnetic about the way she articulated ideas, how she laughed discreetly at her own jokes, how she looked at the audience as if she were talking to each person individually. Laura was unlike anything he knew. Where Daniel was restraint, she was intensity. Where he sought certainty, she fed on possibilities. But there was an intersection between the two that couldn't be ignored, the genuine desire to build a meaningful life. She did not seek luxury, although she had ambition. He did not desire fame, although he knew how to deal with leadership. The first meetings were unpretentious, coffee after meeting, exchanging books, joking about difficult clients. But soon the meetings became full days, weekends, short trips. Love emerged as an inevitable, silent and profound consequence. The wedding was discreet, exactly as he wanted, but with touches of charm from her. Wild flowers instead of expensive arrangements, a soundtrack played by musician friends, and a toast made with words she wrote herself and that brought tears to even the most restrained. They began their lives together in an apartment overlooking a park, where the sound of trees mixed with the laughter of children running around on Sundays. Daniel continued as a financial consultant, while Laura grew quickly within the company where she worked, receiving promotions with the same ease with which she enchanted any room she entered. They had a balanced routine, full of small rituals, dinners on Wednesdays, series on Saturdays, messages during the day just to say, "I miss you." But over time, Laura's professional world began to demand more than expected. Travel became frequent, schedules unpredictable. Daniel, with his usual understanding, accepted each absence as part of a larger project. It was her career taking off, he told himself, and all growth requires sacrifices. Still, he waited for her every time, with the same patience he used to study the financial market. He prepared the house for her arrival, filled the refrigerator with her favorite wines, left notes between the pages of the books she was reading. And when she came back, no matter how tired she was, there was always a moment reserved for him, even if it was brief, even if it was just a long hug in the hallway. In the eyes of others, they were an exemplary couple. Friends often commented on how solid, mature, almost unshakable their relationship seemed. Laura, with her strong presence and undeniable charisma, was admired at work and among her friends. Daniel, with his steady gaze and always calm voice, conveyed a rare tranquility. Together, they seemed to complete each other in a carefully rehearsed dance. No one saw the silent absences in the early hours when she said she was finishing reports. No one noticed her distant look on Sundays when she pretended to watch a movie, or the way her cell phone was never facing up. And Daniel, even though he felt every little distance, chose to ignore the discomfort, attributing it all to the natural wear and tear of everyday life. They planned children. They talked about it countless times, but they always decided to postpone it. Firstly because of her work goals. Then because of a new project he would lead. And then for the new apartment they wanted to buy. Over time, the subject was pushed forward like a book left half-finished. Laura said she wanted more time, that the world was too fast-paced. Daniel smiled and agreed, even when he felt that the postponement was more hers than his. Corporate travel has become the new normal. Every 2 months, Laura needed to visit branches, participate in conferences, close strategic partnerships. Daniel learned to live with packed suitcases and promises of a quick return. In the early years, he still offered to accompany her, even for a weekend. But she always refused, saying that the commitments were too tiring and that she preferred him to rest. Over time, he stopped insisting. He just started waiting. Preparing dinners for one, watching movies alone. Still, their love remained there, intact, even if covered by layers of silence. At Laura's company, there was new leadership. A newly hired general manager who had come from an expanding multinational. Young, eloquent, with a reputation as a strategist. He quickly approached Laura, admiring her competence and vision. They started working together on important projects, sharing meetings, traveling to represent the company at events. Daniel knew of his existence. She spoke about her new boss with professional enthusiasm, like someone who admires a brilliant mind. And Daniel, confident in the love they built, never questioned it. He would pick her up at the airport with flowers, even when flights were delayed. He looked at her with the same eyes as when they first met, even when she was distracted. I listened to her talk about the achievements of her work with the pride of a true fan. He never doubted her delivery. He never questioned his loyalty. For him, Laura was home. The woman he wanted to grow old with. And so, she accepted the absences, the silences, the moments when she seemed to belong more to the outside world than to the house they built together. Little by little, what was once a vibrant and connected marriage began to transform into something more formal. There was still affection, there was still occasional laughter, but the warmth seemed to seep through invisible cracks. Laura was always tired. The conversations, once long and intense, became quick and generic. Daniel's questions, previously full of interest, began to be answered with short, distracted sentences. And yet, he refused to believe anything was wrong. I attributed everything to routine, to tiredness, to the modern demands of a successful professional life. He kept alive the idea that they were just going through a phase. That they would soon have a vacation together, that she would soon have more time, that they would soon resume their plans. And that faith, that silent commitment he had to what they had built, was what kept him going. I planned surprises, wrote notes, organized short trips. He was trying to rekindle, alone, a flame that now only lit one side of the house. Laura, in turn, seemed to divide her life between two worlds. One where Daniel still existed, with his stability, his silent love, his safe touch. And another where the adrenaline of projects, flights, achievements, professional prestige, seemed to fill spaces that she herself didn't know were empty. And so, between the solidity of home and the allure of the corporate world, she was divided into layers. But no abyss appears overnight. It is excavated in silences, in absences, in small decisions that accumulate like dust on old furniture. And even when the ground begins to crack, we often choose not to see, not to hear, not to feel. That's what Daniel did. He preferred to believe. He preferred to love, even alone. And it was at that exact point that their story began to transform, even without them realizing it. Time is a silent sculptor. It shapes your life with almost imperceptible touches until one day you notice the complete transformation. That's how Daniel began to notice that something had changed. There were no fights. There was no screaming. Just a sequence of gestures that seemed out of place. Small delays. Messages answered coldly. An absence that was not physical, but emotional. Laura was there, but she wasn't there. She returned from her travels with detailed stories, but always told with the same mechanical tone, as if she were reciting something by heart. Her eyes no longer met him with the same tenderness. There was a constant rush, an urgency in attitudes that didn't exist before. Even the dinners he prepared, previously received with hugs and compliments, were now just silent meals, interrupted by cell phone notifications or lame excuses about emergency meetings. Daniel tried to ignore it. She told herself that it was just a phase, that the stress had consumed her too much, that all it took was time together for everything to get back on track. Booked a weekend trip. A discreet chalet in the mountains, something just for the two of us. Laura accepted with a faint smile and, in the 2 days they spent together, he noticed that she was more present with her gaze than in the previous months. But it was a momentary relief. When they returned, she sank back into a chaotic routine, more distant than ever. The heat of that weekend became a memory in a matter of days. The same voice that previously vibrated with enthusiasm in conversations was now cold, almost formal. Daniel tried to create bridges, but they all seemed to collapse before they could be crossed. One day, when he arrived home early, he found his room with a different scent. The smell was not Laura's usual perfume, but a strong, masculine fragrance, foreign to the house. Initially, he thought it might be something coming in from the street or even a new cleaner. I didn't want to give in to the thought that pulsed between the lines of this perception. But senses are more faithful than words. And his instinct, which he had learned to silence over the years, began to speak louder. The uncomfortable feeling became constant. Laura's trips became longer, her smiles rarer. And yet, she continued to try to maintain the image that everything was fine. When he asked her if something was bothering her, she firmly denied it. She touched his face, said she loved him, but her eyes seemed to escape his. It was one night, while organizing the office drawers, that Daniel found a receipt. A dinner for two in a sophisticated restaurant, in a city where Laura said she spent the night alone, resting at the hotel after a conference. It wasn't just the name of the restaurant. It was the time, the price, the wine ordered. A romantic dinner, clearly planned. He felt the blood descend like a dry blow to his stomach. But he didn't confront it. Not yet. He kept the paper, like someone keeping evidence of something that still needs to be digested. From there, he began to observe. Noticing the details with the precision of someone who knows they are about to discover something that will dismantle the world as they know it. Each trip became a map of doubts. He started writing down dates, routes, times. He took a cell phone tracking app and installed it silently. Not out of unfounded distrust, but out of emotional survival. I needed to know if I was going crazy or if reality was as harsh as it seemed. And little by little, everything started to fall into place. The places she said she visited did not match the records. The times didn't match. The excuses started to repeat themselves. Messages, once spontaneous, became artificial. And then the opportunity arose. Laura announced a new trip, this time for a 3-day event with the executive team. He said he would be with his colleagues from the head office, who would have group dinners and meetings until late. He said he would be back on Sunday night. Daniel listened carefully, without interrupting. He just smiled and said he was proud of how much she had achieved. That same night, he booked a ticket to the same destination. Using a false name, he also purchased a stay at a discreet hotel near the convention center. I knew I couldn't be hasty. He needed to see it with his own eyes. He needed the truth to be served to him irrefutably. It arrived the day after she boarded. He spent the first day just following the tracks. The location notifications took him to different places than she had described. Restaurants, stores, trips between neighborhoods that didn't match the schedule she had told. And then, on the second day, he saw it. I was in the lobby of the hotel where Laura said she wasn't staying. Sitting in a corner, behind a decorative plant, he saw her arrive hand in hand with a man. Elegant, easy smile, youthful appearance. They talked like people who had known each other for a long time. She was different. The lighter face, the loose laugh, the firm steps. They went up together, without ceremony, without fear, like a normal couple. Daniel didn't move. He felt his hands sweat, his throat dry. For a few moments, he thought about leaving. To pretend you didn't see it. But something pushed him forward. He took out his cell phone and discreetly took some photos. Then it went up. He stopped in front of the door indicated by the location number. It hit. Once, twice. Silence. So, hurried steps. The door opened. And there she was. The face, previously smiling, was disfigured in seconds. Behind her, the man was still adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't ask why. He just walked in, looked around, walked to the window, took a deep breath. Then he turned to the two of them and said, with cold calm, I already knew. I just came to confirm with my own eyes. Laura tried to speak. The words came out in fragments, as if guilt had lodged in his throat. The man tried to justify himself, but Daniel didn't even listen. He looked at her one last time and left, leaving behind not just a hotel room, but everything that had been built in the name of a love that, at that moment, turned out to be one-sided. There was no goodbye. There was no scandal. Just the sound of the door closing. Silence, louder than any scream, settled in the hallway. In the days that followed, Daniel sank into a state of torpor. He didn't want to talk, he didn't look for friends, he didn't respond to messages. I just needed to feel what that pain represented. Because it wasn't just carnal betrayal. It was the collapse of a trust built brick by brick. It was the breaking of something that seemed unbreakable. The wound was too deep to name. But amidst the chaos, clarity began to emerge. He knew he didn't have all the answers yet. There was something about that meeting that didn't end, something in her gaze, in the papers on the table, in the whispers exchanged before the door opened. The betrayal was exposed, yes. But there was an even deeper secret hidden in that room. And the truth he didn't yet know was about to explode. Laura showed up at Daniel's house on a Thursday afternoon with a haggard face, her eyes hidden under sunglasses and an expression that mixed guilt, tiredness and something he couldn't immediately name. She carried a thin leather briefcase in her hands, but Daniel didn't invite her inside. He stood there, standing in the doorway, leaning against the doorframe, watching the woman he called home for years become a strange figure, distorted by the choices she made. She said she needed to talk, that there were things he didn't know and that they couldn't stay buried. He remained silent but moved out of the way. The path to the room was short, but loaded with a weight that Laura seemed to drag with each step. He sat in the armchair where he used to read at night, as if he wanted to anchor himself to a memory, a remnant of what they were. Daniel sat at the front, arms crossed, his gaze fixed and impassive. When she took off her glasses, the deep circles under her eyes and dull skin made it clear that the days following the confrontation had not been easy for either of them. She began slowly, as if afraid that her own voice would reveal more than it should. He said that everything had started professionally, that the new director was just a strategic partner, someone with whom he shared goals, presentations, results. But little by little, as was predictable, he got closer. And she allowed it. She said she didn't know what she was looking for in that involvement, but that she let herself be carried away by the fascination, the adrenaline, the feeling of being seen in a way that she thought she had lost herself in. Daniel listened to her with the rigidity of a rock, but inside each word sounded like a corrosive drop digging even deeper into the pain he thought he already felt completely. However, what she revealed next was not something he could predict. Laura opened the leather folder with shaking hands. From inside, he took out a set of documents and placed them on the table between them. They were copies of financial reports, internal communications, service provision contracts. Daniel immediately recognized the logo of the company where she worked, but what he didn't understand was why she brought it to him. She took a deep breath and then, looking directly into his eyes, said that she needed to confess what she had done. She said that, months earlier, she had been pressured by the director to sign financial authorizations that had not been audited. The justification was simple, an emergency strategy to guarantee a merger with a foreign company, something that would boost the company and, of course, bring significant bonuses for everyone involved. Laura hesitated, but ended up giving in, trusting his word and also blinded by the personal bond they had created. But that wasn't just an administrative decision. The fraud, as she finally named it, involved misappropriated resources, provision of non-existent services, shell companies linked directly to the director. And she, with her signature, had validated everything. Daniel's face remained firm, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. She explained that, on the day he showed up at the hotel, the two were finalizing the last documents for the operation. The room had been reserved by him, under the pretext of absolute secrecy. Laura said that she was starting to suspect everything, that she had questioned some clauses, that she wanted time to review. But he pressured her, saying that they were all involved, that backing down now would be professional suicide and, more than that she would also be investigated if she didn't keep the agreement until the end. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice low but full of restraint. He asked if she had signed. She looked away, and when she answered yes, her voice came out almost like a whisper. He said that morning, before everything happened, he signed the last documents. She also said that she began to be excluded from communications soon after, that access was limited and that the director now barely answered her calls. The air in the room seemed to lose oxygen. She was up to her neck in a criminal scheme, and the man she risked her marriage and career for was disappearing, leaving her to fend for herself. Daniel stood up. He walked to the window without saying anything. She looked outside for a few seconds, perhaps hoping the world outside would offer some logic to the chaos she had spilled out there. Laura continued to sit, motionless, her hands now clasped together as if in prayer. He turned around slowly, his eyes now no longer had the anger of the hotel day. They had something more cutting, disappointment. Not because of the betrayal in love, that he had already absorbed. But through betrayal of character, through the conscious choice to corrupt everything they had built as principles of life. He asked if she had come to him because she regretted it or because she was afraid. She didn't respond right away. Finally, he admitted that he was both. That I didn't know who else to turn to. That she was afraid of being arrested, of losing everything, that she had looked for lawyers, but everyone said that she would be named as an accomplice. Daniel listened to her and then, for the first time, he smiled. A bitter but serene smile. He said she had gone to the wrong man. That he was no longer her safe haven. That this was a storm she had created herself. Laura tried to argue. He said he was the only person he still trusted, that he just wanted help to get out of that situation, that he didn't want to see him involved, but needed him to know everything. Daniel approached slowly, as if choosing each step carefully so as not to get lost in the fury. He said he now understood the reason for the terrified look in the hotel room, that contained despair. She wasn't afraid of losing him. He was afraid of losing his own freedom. Laura stood up too, her eyes now red, her voice louder. He said that yes, he had been wrong, that yes, he had betrayed him in every way, but that there was something bigger behind it all. That the decisions he made were motivated by pressure, by manipulation. Daniel interrupted. He said it was too late for that kind of justification. That he had spent nights trying to understand at what point along the way she had stopped being the woman he fell in love with. She walked over and touched him on the arm. He asked for a chance. She said she wanted to make amends, that she needed him to forgive her. He took her hand away gently but definitively. He said that forgiveness, perhaps, would come one day. But love no longer lived there. And before she could say anything, he walked to the door, opened it, and stood there, waiting. Laura understood. He took the folder, looked at him one last time and left. The sound of the door closing seemed to mark the end of a cycle. However, Daniel did not remain still. He returned to the table, picked up the documents and read them carefully. Every line, every clause. Something in the text disturbed him. A name. A signature. An address. And then, he realized. There was a piece to that puzzle that Laura hadn't noticed, but that might be the key to turning everything around. And maybe, just maybe, he knew exactly what to do with this piece. Daniel spent that night awake, sitting in the dim light of the room with the papers open in front of him as if they were maps of a war fought in silence. His eyes, exhausted, went from clause to clause, line to line, and everything seemed permeated with a bittersweet odor of ambition and desperation. But what disturbed him most was not the scale of what Laura had done, but rather the detail that she, blinded by fear or naivety, had not seen. In the middle of those forged contracts was a name, an ultimate recipient of transferred amounts who should not have been there. A man who had been his client years ago, when Daniel was still working as a risk analyst at an independent company. A name that he knew, with absolute certainty, was involved in illicit international operations and that, for some reason, had been discreetly reinserted into the game. The piece she didn't see, he saw clearly. And that transformed the situation completely. It was no longer just about infidelity, about resentment, or about personal revenge. It was about something bigger, about how someone's ruin could become the key to the destruction of an empire of lies. Daniel knew that, with that information, he could incriminate not only Laura's lover, but a whole chain of businessmen who operated outside the legality with the approval of executives like her. The dilemma was brutal: use what he knew to end them all and, consequently, drag Laura to prison, or remain silent and allow the wheel to turn as it always has, filthy and unpunished. And it was precisely in this dilemma that his mind was anchored during the darkest hours of the morning. In the past, he would have done anything to protect her. Now all that was left was a distorted memory of the woman she once was. Still, a part of Daniel was reluctant to act out of pure revenge. Something in his essence told him that, before destroying, he needed to understand. The next morning, he made the decision to visit someone he hadn't seen in years. A criminal lawyer known for being ruthless but discreet. He did not reveal the origin of the documents, only asking for a technical analysis of the legality of the transfers and contracts. The answer came in less than 48 hours. According to her, the documents were not only illegal, but they represented a valuable piece of a money laundering scheme involving shell companies in more than one country. The name that Daniel recognized was, in fact, the target of confidential investigations. What he had in his hands could change the course of an operation that was already underway, but which lacked concrete documentary evidence. The lawyer asked if he wanted to hand over everything to the authorities. He didn't respond right away. He just said he needed time. That there was more at stake than figures and prisons. Meanwhile, Laura tried to get back on her feet in whatever way she could. She had been removed from the company under the excuse of a strategic sabbatical. Colleagues didn't ask questions, but their looks said more than words could. "I knew I was being observed, analyzed, perhaps even investigated. She tried to maintain her routine, avoid phone calls, ignore the light knocks on the door of the rented apartment that she began to occupy alone. The days seemed to revolve around a dull and continuous fear. And even so, there were still times when she reached out to Daniel. He sent short messages of apologies and promises. He read them all, but didn't respond. I felt that any contact at that moment would just be a way of postponing the inevitable. He needed to do something, and he knew that any false step would cost more than he could bear. The turning point came when Daniel received an envelope left anonymously in his mailbox. Inside, there were copies of photos, Laura and the director together, in meetings that seemed no more professional than the ones he witnessed at the hotel. An anonymous letter warned that the company's internal investigation had begun and that she would likely be singled out as the weakest link. That perhaps it would be in her interest to collaborate with the system, if she wanted to avoid the worst. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. This was more than a warning. It was a disguised threat. A reminder that the truth, when it starts to be unearthed, drags a lot of mud with it. I knew Laura was alone. She knew she was being left behind by those who used her. And there, in that very human dilemma between justice and mercy, between morals and affection, he made a decision that would change everything. He arranged to meet her at a remote cafe, outside the center. When Laura arrived, she was visibly shaken. She dressed discreetly, looking around as if she were afraid of being recognized. He sat down without saying anything. He placed the envelope with the documents and photos on the table. He said he knew everything. Who knew where the money had gone? Who knew who was behind it? And that she knew that, even though she was involved, she was still just a piece on a much bigger board. Laura couldn't stop herself from crying. She said she tried to leave, threatened to expose her, but was intimidated. That he, the lover, the boss, the traitor, had promised to protect her, but that after the signing, he simply disappeared. Daniel listened without interrupting. In a firm but non-acrimonious tone, he told her she needed to make a decision. Either she would collaborate with the authorities and accept the consequences with dignity, or she would be swallowed by a machine that didn't care about anyone. She asked if he would help her. If I would be by her side in this process. Daniel responded honestly, that he no longer loved her, that he respected her as a human being, but that love had died the moment she exchanged trust for convenience. He said there was someone new in his life, a woman who made him feel at peace, who welcomed him when he no longer knew if he deserved to be welcomed. But still, he didn't want to see it destroyed. Who saw her as part of her own story, even with all the wounds. And that, therefore, would help her find the right contacts. But the choice to collaborate or not was hers alone. Laura looked at him with a mix of gratitude and pain. He said he would do the right thing. Not for him. Not for redemption. But because I finally understood the size of the mistake. Because she finally felt, for the first time in a long time, the urgency to be honest with herself. In the following days, Daniel took her to the lawyer responsible for the investigation. The documents were delivered under legal protection, and an agreement began to be negotiated so that she could collaborate in exchange for mitigating circumstances. Meanwhile, Daniel slowly distanced himself from that entire universe. He started breathing again. I went back to sleep. And, little by little, a new feeling grew inside him. Not revenge, but reconstruction. He started walking more often, going to small cafes, visiting forgotten bookstores. And on one of these paths he crossed paths with Helena, a literature teacher with whom he shared long weekly conversations and, little by little, looks that said more than words. It wasn't an explosive love like it had been with Laura. It was something lighter, more honest. A bond that was born from shared silence, from the absence of masks. Helena didn't ask about the past, but she listened whenever he decided to tell her. I knew about the pain, about the cuts that were still open, but I didn't judge them. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, felt like he didn't need to prove anything. It was just him. Whole, wounded, but true. And there, between books and slow coffee, he began to see the world in different colors. I no longer expected answers. He no longer sought justice. He just lived. And this living, simple, honest, silent, was the greatest new beginning I could hope for. Meanwhile, Laura prepared her final statement. I knew I would face a lawsuit. That would have his name exposed. But at least now I knew I was doing this with my head held high. He knew he had lost the man he loved, the reputation he built, and perhaps part of the youth he wasted on illusions. But he had something left that he thought was lost forever, the courage to start over from scratch. What she didn't yet know was that, while all eyes were on the scandal itself, an overlooked detail in one of the documents would reveal a final, surprising twist. And this twist could change everyone's destiny. Once again. The days that followed Laura's testimony were silent for Daniel. He did not follow the process closely, did not seek to know about each stage of her collaboration with the authorities, nor did he ask what she was telling the prosecutors. The decision to move away had been clear, and he remained faithful to it like someone protecting a border that could no longer be violated. What remained now was to reorganize life, not just in the practical field, but in a deeper sphere, where everything that was destroyed inside was still in the process of being reconstructed. While Laura moved within the legal system, negotiating terms, preparing her defense, facing the consequences of years of thoughtless decisions, Daniel immersed himself in what gave him the most structure, the simplicity of a smooth routine. He started cooking again, resumed old projects and, little by little, allowed himself to live days that didn't revolve around past pain. With Helena, things moved at their own pace, almost silent, but full of meaning. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, but was present. I knew when to listen, when to hug and when to leave space. He, in turn, still didn't feel ready to name what was growing between the two, but he no longer doubted that he was on a path where there was possibility, where there was lightness. One afternoon, the two walked through a street market, laughing at the antique stalls and sharing an ice cream melted by the unseasonable heat. In a brief but symbolic moment, she intertwined her fingers with his as they passed a group of musicians playing something reminiscent of an old French song. Daniel did not react with surprise, nor with hesitation. He simply accepted the gesture as if recognizing that there are bonds that are born not from euphoria, but from the reunion with what once seemed lost. Meanwhile, the case involving financial fraud began to attract press attention. Small notes began to appear in local newspapers, mentioning the company, the removed executives and the ongoing investigations. No names had been officially revealed, but Daniel knew it was only a matter of time. What he didn't expect was to receive a call from the prosecutor's old contact, the one with whom Laura had negotiated the deal. The voice on the other end of the line was neutral but direct. He said something new had emerged. A specific document, different from the others. He said that Daniel's name appeared there, not as an accomplice, but as a former financial consultant who, years ago, had given a technical opinion on one of the companies involved. Daniel was silent, digesting the information with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. The man continued, there was a meeting scheduled, and although he was not accused of anything, it would be prudent for him to attend to clarify his participation in that technical opinion and make it clear that he had no involvement in subsequent transactions. Daniel agreed to go, more as a precaution than out of obligation. On the appointed day, he entered the meeting room with the calmness of someone who knows his own integrity. He sat in front of 3 investigators and a lawyer from the prosecution. They gave him a copy of an opinion signed by him, dated 7 years earlier, recommending caution when working with a newly created company that was now known to be one of the fronts used in the scheme. Daniel explained that, at the time, he had warned about inconsistencies, but that, as a consultant, his role was limited to analysis and guidance, not decision-making. They agreed. The lawyer confirmed that his name appeared only as a reference, without any indication of criminal involvement. Still, one of the prosecutors asked, in a careful tone, how he had recognized the name of the recipient of the transactions in the documents delivered by Laura. Daniel hesitated for a second, then told the truth. He kept personal records, old reports that he used to track suspicious companies. It was a habit of his, almost a way of protecting himself, given the type of work he did in the past. The investigators seemed satisfied, and the meeting ended with an official note that he would not be called again unless new facts emerged. As he left the room, Daniel felt something rare in recent months, genuine relief. But the relief was short-lived. On the way back, he received an unexpected message from Laura. Not a plea, not an apology, but an invitation. He said there was something important he needed to show, something that couldn't be sent by email, and that he preferred to deliver it by hand. Against his own instinct, Daniel accepted. He arranged a meeting in the park where, years before, they had made plans to buy a bigger house, perhaps with a garden for the children who never came. When she arrived, she was visibly transformed. Not just because of his physical appearance, thinner, deep-set eyes, but because of a sobriety that bordered on resignation. She sat down next to him on a wooden bench under an ancient tree and took out a small envelope from her bag. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photo. The letter was not for him, but from one of the executives involved in the scheme, addressed to the general director, Laura's former lover. In it, the woman described how she had been instructed to manipulate Laura emotionally, to use her as a bridge to access the company's internal sectors, and how, after the fraud was successful, she should be discreetly removed. The photo was of a meeting between the two, the director and the executive, in a luxurious restaurant, dated a week before Laura signed the last documents. Daniel read everything in silence. When he finished, he returned the letter to her and asked why she was showing it now. Laura replied that she needed him to know that, despite everything, she too had been deceived. That, on some level, she was not just guilty, but the victim of a more complex manipulation. He said he didn't want absolution or compassion. I just couldn't stand the idea that he thought it was all just selfishness or coldness. Daniel didn't respond immediately. The two of them stayed there, in silence, listening to the footsteps of people in the park, the distant sound of a dog barking. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. He said he understood. Who recognized how much she had been manipulated. But that didn't change the fact that she chose to lie to him, not once, but several times. He said that everyone makes mistakes, but some mistakes have irreversible consequences. And that what hurt was not the crime, nor the scandal, but the emotional abandonment of someone he deeply trusted. She just nodded, without contesting. She said she now understood what he had felt all those months, that loneliness inside her own house, that look she avoided, those words she refused to hear. He said that time didn't go back, but that maybe, one day, he would be able to look at all that with less pain. Daniel didn't promise anything. He just got up, thanked her for what she had shown and left. As I walked along the path between the trees, I no longer felt anger or compassion. I felt a strange sense of closure. As if, finally, history had reached its resting point. At home, when he opened the door, Helena was waiting for him with a glass of wine and a book in her hands. Her calm gaze didn't demand answers, it just offered presence. He approached her, touched her face affectionately and said that, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could build something again. Something that wasn't based on promises, but on choices. Choices made every day, in silence, like bricks of a new foundation. Helena smiled and stood up to hug him, and in that simple gesture there was more than comfort, there was hope. And even though the past still echoed with painful memories, Daniel knew he no longer needed to run away from it. Because now, anyway, I was ready to continue. 6 months later, the trial of the case involving Laura's company was concluded. The press finally released names, figures and details of an operation that caused an irreversible shock to a corporate network that for years profited in the shadow of corruption. The final hearing was broadcast discreetly on legal platforms, but snippets of the scandal soon spread across investigative news channels. Laura's face appeared in articles of an ambiguous tone, sometimes as an accomplice, sometimes as the disposable piece of a dirty game that swallowed her and spat her out when she was no longer useful. Her collaboration with the prosecutor's office was decisive in dismantling the network of shell companies and paving the way for larger investigations. Still, his sentence was not completely suspended. The court, although it recognized her role as a collaborator, did not exempt her from responsibility for her actions and signatures. The sentence was a combination of home confinement, heavy fines and a decade's ban on holding any corporate management position. When she left the courtroom, surrounded by few looks and no hugs, Laura seemed smaller than she once was, but there was a strange form of acceptance in her eyes. There was no more pretense, no more running away. Just the need to face what was left of his own conscience. In the months leading up to the outcome, she lived in a small rented apartment, far from her old social and professional circles. He spent his days writing, they said, as an attempt to record his side of the story or perhaps to understand himself. He received few visits and avoided any public exposure. He didn't try to justify himself to Daniel again, nor did he try to get closer. At some point, he understood that certain losses cannot be cured with explanations, and that sometimes, the true punishment does not come from the justice of men, but from the irreversible loneliness of those who recognize themselves as responsible for each false step. The woman who once commanded meetings with a steady gaze and impeccable posture was now remembered as a symbol of the fine line between ambition and ruin. Not because of his weakness, but because of his conscious choice to cross borders that should never have been crossed. On the other side of this story, Daniel continued his life with a serenity that seemed unthinkable months before. The storm that destroyed her marriage, her trust, and some of her faith in people was now giving way to a calm clarity. He moved to a smaller house, close to a bookstore where he spent entire afternoons reading, writing or simply watching the people on the street. With Helena, the relationship evolved slowly, built not on promises but on mutual care and genuine sharing. He no longer saw himself as a victim, nor did he carry the weight of the past with bitterness. On the contrary, he felt lighter, almost grateful for everything that came to light. Because, amidst the chaos, he discovered that pain is also a starting point. He learned to live with scars without allowing them to define his identity. The man who, one day, was betrayed on all levels, was now someone capable of truly smiling, not because everything was back in place, but because he built a new one, where nothing needed to be hidden anymore. Helena, in turn, always remained firm, without ever trying to occupy a space that wasn't hers. She understood Daniel's silences, respected his moments of reflection and knew that love is not built in a rush to fill the voids left by others. By your side, he relearned to trust, to allow himself to take pleasure in simple things, like cooking together, discussing a book or walking aimlessly at dusk. There were no sweeping declarations, but there was a silent pact of truth between the two. And maybe that was what made that bond so solid. Daniel no longer felt the need to prove he was okay. He just was. The man who destroyed Laura's life, the director who manipulated her with surgical skill, was sentenced to 12 years in prison following the evidence she gave. His name became synonymous with corruption in the corporate sector and the fall was as brutal as his meteoric rise had been. He lost respect, prestige, assets, and even the right to remain silent. He was publicly exposed, discredited by former allies and sued by several victims of the scheme. The irony was bitter, the man who engineered million-dollar contracts now slept on a thin mattress, surrounded by bars and memories of a power that would never be recovered. His assets were blocked, his companies were dismantled and, in addition to the legal punishment, the biggest blow was the contempt with which he began to be treated by those who had once flattered his authority. The corporate world is quick to rise, but merciless when it falls. And his was definitive. Daniel, despite having been a side piece in the entire plot, received discreet praise from the authorities for the way he handled the evidence and the support offered to the investigation. But he did not seek recognition. He preferred to stay away from the euphoria of the headlines. For him, the real merit was having gone through all of this without losing himself. When asked by a reporter how he felt after seeing everyone involved being held accountable, he replied simply that it wasn't about victory, but about truth. And that the truth, no matter how painful it was always better than any illusion. Months later, Daniel published a book. It was neither a biography nor an explicit account of what he experienced. It was fiction based on real emotions, a novel about losses, truths and reconstructions. The book gained prominence for the depth of its characters, for the raw honesty with which it dealt with topics such as trust, ethics and starting over. And, even without saying it, anyone who read it carefully recognized that there was something lived there. Helena was the first reader, and when she finished, she just looked at him and said, "You were cured." Daniel smiled and replied, "I am healing every day." Laura read the book alone, in the apartment where she was serving her alternative sentence. He read each page like someone looking through a shattered mirror. I knew that the female character was not a reproduction of her, but carried traces of what she was, what she destroyed, what she tried to mend. He didn't cry. He just closed the book gently, as if closing an internal chapter, and walked to the window to watch the late afternoon. He knew he would never get back what he lost. But I also knew that I would live, from now on, under the raw light of those who chose to face the consequences. Perhaps that, in itself, was a start. And so the story ended not with screams, not with cinematic reconciliations, but with the strange and powerful stillness of a real outcome. Each followed a path that made sense for who they became. No pain was erased, but all were faced. And in this confrontation, there was growth. Because betrayal, when exposed, has the power to devastate, but also to reveal who we are when everything falls apart. Daniel moved on with his life, now lighter, more aware, more whole. Laura, with the marks of what she experienced, learned to carry her own weight. And in the midst of it all, a new love was born, not as a replacement, but as a consequence of those who chose to move forward with dignity. If you made it this far, leave your comment telling us what you thought of this story. Your opinion is important and helps us to continue bringing impactful, real and transformative stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell and share this video with someone you know needs to hear this message. Remember, this channel does not support any type of cheating. The stories we tell here aim to show how lies and disloyalty destroy lives. And most importantly, as always, it is possible to start over.